Okay.
Firstly, welcome back to Beyond the Title. This podcast is predominantly about comedy heroes, but first I wanted to get your own thoughts on comedy. So how important is it for us to preserve Britain's comedy heritage?
Well, that's a good question, but I think it's very important because, most of my known career, I've been involved in comedy world, and they always say that comedy, a laugh is the best medicine. And I always think that's very true. It's the best medicine there is. Makes you feel good, makes you have a good laugh, and that's why comedy is so important. And that's why I feel blessed to have been involved in it for all those years that I have. So it's just one of those things that I fell into, I suppose, because I could do it. I've always loved making people laugh when the opportunity came along. I'm not a comedian as such. I'm an actor, who is given comedy roles in certain scripts, and you apply your acting skills to the written word, and if you do it right, your audience will laugh and enjoy themselves. And that's why, dare I say it, that our shows that we did all those many years ago are still popular today when they're repeated, because they're just genuine fun, just good, clean fun. And people like that. There's no embarrassment in them at all. The characters just bounce off each other. And I think that was Jimmy Perry and David Croft's great gift. And they were able to cast the right kind of characters together and to get the right actors to play those characters. And that's what happened in Dad's Army, and the Eight Half Hot Mum, and then Heidi High, and You Rang Me Lord onwards to Dr. Beeching, because all those people in those situations, the clever thing for them was that they wouldn't naturally have been together. In the concert party, they were all conscripts that were thrown into the jungle, into the concert party, because they were various questionable talents, dare we say, and those businessmen in Warmington-on-Sea would never have socialised with each other, but under the common umbrella of the Home Guard, they were forced together and to get on with each other and to make an effort to produce, to combat the war effort. And that's where the comedy comes from, the interaction between the characters. It's the same thing in Heidi High. All the characters in the entertainment staff were failures. They were absolute failures in their own chosen professions. I've said it before. It's always worth saying again. The ballroom dancing couple who hadn't won a cup since 1943. The ex-jockey who pulled the race, taken a bribe and pulled the race, lost his license. So he's looking after the horses and the donkeys. And my character, Spike, he wants to be a great comedian. He left the tax office under the auspices of Ted Bovis, who wanted to train him up to be a comic, because Spike's got all the enthusiasm in the world, but absolutely no talent whatsoever. And that becomes evident. The only talent Spike seemed to have was about making funny costumes. But he could have gone into the wardrobe side of the theatre rather than a comedian on stage. But he had all the dare I say, balls in the world, like Jimmy Perry. Jimmy got up and he based his character, my character, on his own experiences of Butlins. And Jimmy used to get up and do jokes and entertain, and Jimmy was full of it all the way through to his last few years, bless his heart. And that's what's important to me about comedy. It's good. It's a good tonic, and long may it continue.
Absolutely. Writing and starring in your own stage play surrounding Laurel and Hardy must have been a great achievement. But what did you learn about the double act when creating it?
Well, I knew an awful lot about them to begin with, which is why I wanted to tell the story. And when I met Gail Lowe, who wrote the bulk of the text for me, we collaborated on it. And I knew, as I say, I knew a lot about them both, but it was particularly Stan's story that I wanted to tell, because so many people don't know all that part of his background. The fact that he had a little baby boy who died. He was born in 1930 and he lived 9 days. Mortality amongst children was much worse than it is now, thank goodness, in those days. And he lost a baby son at 9 days old, and that's in the play. And it's quite a poignant little piece for me to act. And all the money that they made, all the money that they lost. Stan lost a fortune in the Wall Street crash in 1929. Never recouped much of it. He lost about 30 grand. and those had to put a fortune in those days. And he made about £6,000 back, but that was all. But you know, the wives they had, both of them. You know, Oliver Hardy had 3 wives, and you know, the last one survived him, as did Stan's final wife. He said, you know, there's a line in the play that said, "I've got a wonderful wife at long last." You know, I might have taken a few hostages on the way, but I got there in the end. You know, that's a lovely line from Gale, though. There, but you know, it's the story of life, and I learned a lot about Laurel and Hardy too. And I didn't really know that Oliver Hardy had laid in his sickbed for 11 months, nearly a year after his massive stroke, before he eventually passed away. His body just deteriorated, got worse and worse and worse, until finally, in the end, he died in Lucille's arms, you know, his wife. And there's a lot of details like that I didn't know, that I find absolutely amazing. Little stories, too, that I wanted to put in, that I was told personally by people that knew them. Tommy Trinder, there was a great comic called Tommy Trinder. I don't know whether you remember him. Yeah, I think Josh does, yeah. And he shared a dressing room with me back in the late 70s during pantomime season. And he was sort of on the last uppers of his career at the time, because he was quite an old chap then. And he appeared in the 1947 Royal Variety Show, or the Royal Command Performance, as it was called in those days, at the Palladium, when Laurel and Hardy were touring the UK with their stage show in 1947. And they appeared on the Royal Command show. And there's a story he told me, which I wanted to put in the play, which I have. And he said he was standing in the wings with Laurel and Hardy and the stage manager who was running the show. And of course, the audience in those days were all white tie tails, jewelry and tiaras. And it was really a question of who was there to be seen to be there, not to be actually watching the show and enjoying it and laughing, because they weren't laughing. They were not laughing. They were just looking around to see who else was there, you know, in the audience. And Oliver Hardy actually noticed and said to the stage manager in the wings, he said, "They're very quiet here tonight, aren't they?" And the stage manager just sort of shrugged and he said, "Well, yeah, they're always quiet here on a Monday." You know, because they always used to hold the Royal Variety Show on a Monday at the Palladium. That was the tradition. And he told me, Tommy Trinder told me that story in our dressing room together. And I thought, well, that's a cracker, that, you know, it really is. So I wanted to put that in the show. So I got Gail to include that. Little things like that. And there was an actor I met called Henry Brandon, who'd appeared in one of their feature movies in 1934. He was playing an old wicked landlord. It was a melodrama sort of thing. Babes in Toyland, it was called. And he said there was a scene that they wanted to include. And he said, he said to Stan, "Well, are we going to rehearse it?" And so Stan said, no, look, Babe will do that. I'll do that. Then you do that. And he said, "Well, aren't we going to rehearse it?" And Stan said, "What, do you want to spoil it?" You know, that was Stan's attitude. He didn't rehearse deliberately with Ollie. They just talked about what they were going to do, and because they had such good instincts with each other, they just ad-libbed most of it, having mapped out the scenario of the piece. They ad-libbed it, and they used all these wonderful phrases and expressions like, "Why don't you do something to help me?" You know, that they used to trot out all the time. And that was why Henry Brandon just couldn't get his head around the fact that they didn't want to rehearse. So anyway, it worked, it paid off. But the little stories like that I wanted to get into the play, they're there now. And it's little details that make up that piece that is so important to me, to tell the story of Stan Laurel's life and Laurel and Hardy's together. You know, it's a wonderful play, and I'm very proud of it. I'm hoping to get it back on soon when I can, when it's safe to go out there again. Yeah. We're getting there.
Yeah. In what ways are Stan Laurel's own contributions to British comedy frequently overlooked?
Well, you know, he was a genius in his own right. He was, again, a lot of people don't realise or don't know that he was not just the silly little dim guy you saw on the screen, the twit, if you like, the foil of all the jokes. He was the brains behind the entire act. You know, he went in, he worked with the writing team on all the storylines and the scripts and the layouts. And then when they were shooting, he virtually directed everything himself. You know, they had credited directors for the films, but they just let Stan get on with it because he knew what he wanted and he knew what he was doing, and it made their lives a lot easier. So when you've got an accredited director on the credits at the end of the film, you know he did half the work and Stan did most of it. And then at the end of the day, when they finished shooting, Oliver used to go off and play golf, which he loved to do. And Stan went back into the editing room, the cutting room, with the editors and chopped it all up and put it together how he wanted it to be. So all the films of Laurel and Hardy really are how Stan Laurel wanted them to be. You know, and that was his contribution. He was a creator behind the entire piece, all the whole act. Marvelous, man.
He ever to anything in Britain as to himself.
Did he do anything in Britain just as himself, by himself?
After Babe died, you mean?
Yeah.
No, he never did. No, he never did. He had several offers, including a very generous offer, but from his friend Jerry Lewis, who was a big film comic at the time. And he was a great friend of Stan's, Jerry Lewis. And when Babe had died, Babe was Oliver Hardy's nickname. I call him Babe because I do. And he was offered, Stan was offered to be a consultant on Jerry Lewis's comedy writing team. But because he knew Jerry Lewis was quite volatile personality and was prone to getting very angry with people, he didn't take up the offer because he valued his friendship with Jerry Lewis more than he did the job, if you like. He knew there'd be trouble, he knew they'd fall out and it would ruin the friendship. So he chose not to take up the offer and keep the friendship, which he did. But, you know, at the end of the day, he had many offers, but he chose not to work again, ever, because he felt it would be disloyal to Babe's memory. You know, he couldn't work on his own. He worked as half a double act, and he knew it wouldn't be the same for him or for people watching. So he chose not to.
A bit like Ernie Wise.
A bit like Ernie Wise, yes. Ernie did try when Eric had died. He did try. I saw him do a radio series. I met him a couple of times after Eric. I never met Eric, but I met Ernie a couple of times after Eric had died, and he was lonely. He really was lonely. He was lost without Eric. He completely lost. He tried very hard to work on his own to become, Ernie Wise as Ernie Wise, but it was hard for the public to accept him without Eric, and he struggled, and he struggled to the day he died, bless him. But he always wanted to be a Hollywood star, but never quite made it. You know, that was Ernie's big dream to be. You know, all these big numbers they did in the show, like Singing in the Rain, with a famous one in their big shows. He wanted that to be for a reality for him. He wanted to be in Hollywood doing that kind of stuff. But you know, it was never going to happen. It was never going to happen. But he was very lonely without Eric, just the same as Stan was without Babe. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I guess that's the difference between someone like Ronnie Corbett, who was like a performer in their own right.
Yes, very different. No, Ronnie Corbett was an equal of Ronnie Barker's, shall we say. The two Ronnies was a wonderful combination of the two of them because they both bounced off each other. They both loved each other, and they both appreciated each other's talent. And you know, Ronnie Barker did a lot of solo things, but Ronnie Corbett also loved to be on his own. You know, without the big Ronnie. he used to sit on that chair and tell very bad stories, very bad jokes. But, you know, because they were so bad, they were funny and the audience loved him doing them. But he was quite happy standing up on his own, Ronnie, and he carried on after Big Ronnie died. And he made a few appearances on his own, but he enjoyed it. He was an exception to that rule, I think, in a way. Yeah.
And of course, Laurel and Hardy aren't the only comedy institution that you've celebrated. In 2001, you reunited with Andrew Seacombe for the radio celebration Goon again. How daunting was it to revive something of such cultural significance?
Well, it was a great challenge. That it really was. I've worked with the producer of that show, a man called Dirk Maggs, who has been a producer for a long, long time. And I worked with him back in the 80s and the 90s on radio comedies. And Dirk always shared his love of the Goon Show with me. And of course, I've always done the voices just for fun, just for the hell of it. You know, and he knew I'd got the Peter Sellers characters off pat pretty much, and he tried to get this team together. And he went up to the head of BBC Radio Comedy at the time, a man called James Moyer, not our friend Vic Reeves, but the original James Moyer, who was a producer. And he said he wanted to recreate, because he'd done Flywheel, Shyster and Flywheel as a series, which was really a celebration of the Marx Brothers humour. And he wanted to do the Goon Show and call it Goon again, which we did eventually. But remember James Moyer, and you'll pardon the French, James Moyer said to him, "All right, I'll stick my neck out, go ahead and try, but don't fuck it up." And we didn't. And it was just enormous fun. I've got a poster on the wall up there. It's a bit too small to show you details, but it's one of my many posters on the wall there, I'm very proud of. And we did this, the four of us, Andrew Seacombe playing his father Harry's part. It was very upsetting for Andy that night. I didn't realise until afterwards, when he actually got into the dressing room and burst into tears at his wife's arms, because Harry was near his death at the time. He was a very, very sick man with his cancer, and he was lying at home. But he did say to Andy, you know, don't be ashamed, don't be frightened of it. He said, think of it as taking over the family business, which Andy did. Andy did embrace it, but it was very, very tricky for him emotionally. We had Lance Ellington on singing for his father, Ray Ellington, you know, who sang with the original Goon shows. Lance sang one of his dad's songs exactly like him, and it was uncanny to be there when he was singing it. And we had Christopher Timothy, best known, of course, for the original films, the Creatures Great and Small series, playing the role of announcer, because his own father, Andrew Timothy, had been the Goon Show's original announcer back in the very early 50s. So we had that, and we had my friend John Glover doing the Milligan voices. I worked with John a lot as well, with Dirk Maggs in that. And so between the four of us, we had a wonderful evening. One of the best, I've always said, it was the best night I ever spent in the theatre. And then you put that in your book, didn't you, Josh? I know, because I read that the other day, and it was lovely. It's a phrase I've been quoted as saying, and I really meant that. It was quite a very special night for me in the theatre. Couldn't believe it. John Wilson's orchestra, the great John Wilson, who he is now, he does the proms every year now. He does all the Hollywood music at the proms every year. And he was just on his way up at the time. This was 2001, you know, 21 years ago when we did that. And we had such fun. It was, I'll never forget it as long as I live. Great, a tribute to the Goons, but a great night for us. Yeah.
He gives us a bit now.
Can you give us a bit now?
Oh dear. Oh, well, I went, Major Bloodlock, you know. Oh, look out there, no, come along there. Mind the thunderbox there. I went, oh, and it was my entrance was Bloodlock's music, the big band entrance that Bloodlock has. I can't repeat that. But he said, oh dear, oh, I say, oh, the explosions going off left, right and centre. Oh, no more curried eggs for me. Oh. And all that. And there was Henry Crun, of course. Oh, mean. Oh, what are you doing, naughty mean? You know, all those lovely voices. Great, just great fun to do.
Yeah.
In
There
the
you
la- yeah, moving on to a slightly sadder subject, but in the last few weeks, Britain has lost a true comedy pioneer. What are your favourite memories of Barry Cryer?
Well, Barry, bless him. We talked about this the other night because it was just the day after Barry died, and Barry Cryer was immortal. I know he died, but it's a silly thing to say, but his memory will live on as one of the greatest comedy inputs in the British comedy scene. You know, Barry was, to me, he was ageless. You know, ever since I've known Barry, and I've known him 30 or 40 odd years, you know, we've done radio shows together when he sat next to each other on a panel, trying to be funny. He was a great writer, a great creator of gags, and a great gag teller too. But he was always, to me, he always seemed ageless. You know, he'd always been there, and it was like he was always going to be there. But you know, to actually learn of his passing was quite a shock to the whole business. And you know, there'd be a big hole left in show business now Barry's gone. Because you know, I've got him on my phone. I used to ring him up occasionally, we'd have a little chat, and you know, he'd always finish with a joke. He'd always got jokes to tell. You know, he used to have to create jokes for other comics, and you know, he'd written for all the great names in the business over the years. And Barry Cryer, he's just go down in history as an absolute legend, a comedy legend, much missed. Yeah.
And what is his legacy on British comedy?
Sorry?
What is his legacy on British comedy?
Well, there you go. I sort of said it. It's he'll be remembered by everybody. You say, "Oh, I wish I could ring Barry and talk about that." You know, he'd give me an idea. You know, and that's what he'd be like. He's immortal. He will be, and he'll be remembered forever by all the people like me who knew him in the business. And you know, it's a pity because we don't have people like Barry Cryer in the comedy game now. It's all very different now with the stand-ups that are working. They're very successful and they've got great following. But they're not the same as Barry. Barry was a good old-fashioned theatre gag teller and writer, and a stalwart of the comedy business. You know.
And he was there every in history.
Yeah, and he was at every comedy landmark as well.
Yes.
During the decades.
Yes, that's right. And I mean, it's talking of landmarks. We unveiled a statue to Spike Milligan in Finchley, you know, because he used to live in Finchley a few years ago. And we did a big unveiling there, and there were a lot of celebrities there. And I was invited along to be part of it because of my association with the Goons. And I was asked to read a speech that Barry Cryer had written because couldn't be there. He had other commitments. He couldn't be there on the day. So I was given this piece of paper to read this, you know, tribute speech from Barry Cryer to the assembled crowd. And that was quite a humbling experience, really, to read Barry's words and to be. I got a couple of laughs for him, which was nice. So yeah, that was quite an interesting experience for me. Yeah. He was always there, as you say, all the big events. He was there at the Goon show when we did the Goon show recording. I think you quoted him in the book, Josh, as having said, he came up to me and he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "That was spot on." You know, and I've never forgotten that. Never. It was a great tribute from a great comic. You know.
I remember he used to win this family to the family. Family. The family.
All right. All right, yeah. I get what you're saying now. Barry used to call up Josh and say, "Hello, this is Barry to another Barry."
Oh, right. That's nice. That's nice, yeah. Young Barry and Mr. Barry. Oh, lovely. He was a smashing bloke and we shall miss him terribly.
Yeah. In recent years, you've done several conversational shows with Robert Ross celebrating your formidable comedy career. In what ways has this changed your own perception of your vast achievements?
Well, I'm totally humbled by everything. I mean, I'll put it straight back to you, Josh, because I read what you'd written in your book about me, and I couldn't believe you were talking about me. Who is this comedy? Who is this comedy god that you keep on about? I think he means me, but it's very humbling. It's a very humbling experience to be cast in that kind of way as part of. Let me put it this way: I am very, very pleased and very proud to have been a part of what they are now calling the classic era of British television sitcom, and to have been a part of that makes me very, very proud indeed. So, it's still very humbling when people talk about me in those terms. People like me and Sue, somebody tweeted the other day, they want us to take that little conversation show up north so people in the north and the Midlands can see it. So Robert's looking into the possibility of possibly doing that, because there were people in that audience who've known us all our lives, and they said afterwards, because we were in great demand in the street afterwards, we just couldn't get away. But people were saying, things like, I learned so much tonight. I didn't know that about you, and this about that, and they learned things they didn't know about us. They thought they knew it all, but they didn't. So a little show like that, a little chat show like that, is very valid, to help people understand what they want to know. And I'm flattered that they want to know more about me and Sue and the likes of us, the stuff that we've done over the years. Oh, look, I've just noticed my Dyson vacuum cleaner on the wall underneath Joan Collins there. I usually put a big vase of flowers in front of that to cover it up, but I forgot to do that today.
We didn't even notice until you pointed it out.
I just noticed. I usually do that with a big vase of flowers on the table.
Josh thought it was some sort of alarm or something, some sort of fitting. So looking back at your career, what would you say is your proudest achievement?
Oh, well, I mean, so much to look back on, really. I suppose Heidi High will always be blessed, because that's what put me on the map in the first place. It put a face to the name and a name to my face, so people knew who I was for the first time. But my two greatest achievements for me, the first one being You Rang My Lord, because I was so very proud of that, as was David Croft. He always said it was the cherry on his cake. He was very proud of that production. And we were all very pleased to be a part of it. And I was absolutely thrilled. It was like working in a real house with those wonderful costumes, fabulous props and the scenery. And, they spent a lot of money on that show. And it's just a pity the BBC didn't nurture it the way they should have done. They should have repeated it, because the DVDs are selling very well, that they have done. People still love that show, and I get letters all the time. So really, You Rang My Lord, I suppose. And then, of course, Mr. Laurel, my one-man show. It's an achievement I've waited over 40 years to get on stage with. Because when I had the idea when I was a young man, back in the 70s, I knew I was too young to do it. You can't tell a life story until you've had a life. And I waited until I was in my late 60s before I actually got it onto the stage. And of course, it works now very well, because I'm sort of the similar age now, Stan, just how Stan was when those last few days of Babe's life. So I'm a lot older now than Stan was now. But anyway, there we go. That's it.
That you do well, and yet you do your own.
How do you think your own platform has allowed you to do things like that, like passion projects like the show?
How my own what background?
Your platform.
Oh, my platform. I don't quite know what you mean by that.
If you were unknown or at going out, they wouldn't have that sort of trust in you. Of part you are
I think what Josh was alluding to was because of the career you've had and your reputation, that is your platform, and that has allowed you to then go on to do these passion projects whereas if it was a younger person just starting out, maybe they wouldn't have had the backing or support.
Yes, I know what you mean. It was when I first took Mr. Laurel to the Edinburgh Festival back in 2014. I mean, I went to see Anthony, who runs the Pleasance Courtyard, where all those little venues are, and we discussed it. And he actually said, not me, but he said, well, the combination of your name and his name should sell the show. So I did have that advantage in as much as people knew who I was then. And I was able to bring, and this is my friend, Mr. Laurel, to the Edinburgh Fringe and do very well. I've been up there 3 times now. I've sold out 3 times with it. And I'm hoping to take it back again next year in 23.
Oh, brilliant.
Because it would have been 10 years since I first put it out in 13. You know, I'll give it a final outing and see how it goes. I might be too old for it then. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I still have the energy to do it. I'll do it then again if I can. It's a hard slog with the Fringe, because if it's worth going, it's worth going for the whole month of August. You know, and you can. I actually made a profit, which is quite unusual when you go to Edinburgh, because it's a very expensive thing to do. You have to cover your own costs but, you know, because I was in a slightly bigger room for the 3rd and 4th year I was there, we were able to take more money at the door. And as a result, I covered my costs and went home with some money in my pocket, which was very unusual and quite, you know, quite gratifying, really. So I shall give it another go next year, all being well. So we'll see. But yes, you're right. It is my name, because people know who I am now. It does help to be able to get out there and give myself more credibility, if you like. Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
How do you think your era of comedy will be remembered?
Well, I think with the risk of repeating myself, I think people call it the golden age of British sitcom. You know, the 70s and 80s. You know, creeping into the 90s with Dr. Beeching, which we did, and I think, you know, I was going to say proud to repeat myself and say I was very proud to be a part of what is considered the golden age of British comedy, and how lucky I am, really, to have been around at that time and to work with David Croft and Jimmy Perry on the Dad's Army stage show back in '75, which is where we first met. And I was just recruited as a piece of walking furniture, really, the boys and girls chorus. And when in rehearsals, throughout rehearsals, they both realized what I was capable of and how useful I could be to them, as a result of which I was asked to do a couple of 8-hour hot moms, a couple of Are You Being Served, a Dad's Army itself in the final series. I was driving a truck and nearly running Clive Dunn over. But and then, of course, when Heidi High came up, they wrote Spike with me in mind, which is wonderful. So, you know, I'm a very lucky man to have been part of all that. And that's how I consider myself to be very lucky. Thank you. And
final question, what's next for Jeffrey Holland?
I don't know. I'm still in lockdown, you know. I've got to be careful with my, because I've got a condition, I've got a blood condition, which puts me on the critically vulnerable list. You know, it's not terribly serious or life-threatening. I've got medication which has leveled it all out. So, you know, but I am on the critically vulnerable list technically. So I have to be very careful, you know, I don't put myself at risk, which is why we transferred our show the other night to the Leicester Square Theatre from the museum, because the museum is a tiny little place, as you know, very, very small and intimate and no ventilation whatsoever. With 75 seats sold out, it would have been a very crowded little room. So we went to because they also own the Leicester Square Theatre. Rob thought it might be a better idea if we go to there to do it. And of course, it worked out terrifically well, because Sue and I were up on the stage, away from everybody, and away from potential infections. But, you know, we mixed with everybody outside afterwards. And I had to go to hospital for a blood test yesterday, and I tested negative. So all is well. All is well.
Good.
So yeah, so you know, there we are. So